All the Young Dudes, Sirius's Perspective by ROLLERCOASTERWORDS. Chapter 3, First Year, The Sorting. So, where do you think you lads will end up? James asked. They were nearing the school now, and the students were changing into their uniforms. I'm open for Gryffindor. Gryffindor? Sirius scrunched up his nose. Really? His father always said that Gryffindor was full of hot-blooded idiots. James didn't seem offended by the skepticism. He smiled broadly, unsubconsciously, as he said, Yeah, my dad's a Gryffindor. I think it's the coolest, don't you? Sirius thought that James was the coolest, so maybe his opinion counted for something. James Potter was friendly and self-assured, the heir to one of the oldest pureblood families, but one that wasn't as concerned with blood purity as the Blacks, judging by how Sirius's parents had warned him away from them. James had an easy, laid-back confidence that somehow didn't come off as entitled. Perhaps it was how he treated Peter, his chubby, undersized friend, with such genuine kindness. Peter, in return, seemed to worship James. He was from a pureblood family too. Peter Pettigrew. Sirius recognized the name. The Pettigrews were notorious for turning out squibs, and none of them were very powerful. Plus, he had heard some scandal with Peter's older sister recently. Apparently she was almost as bad as Andromeda. Peter, for his part, seemed to be a nervous wreck, clinging to James like a lifeline. Although the question had been directed at Sirius, it was Peter who answered, squeaking eagerly, I do! I want to be in Gryffindor too, James! Sirius had to stop himself from rolling his eyes. He was sure that Peter would just pick whatever house James said was the best. What's a Gryffindor? The other boy interrupted. Lupin, that was his name, Remus Lupin. When Sirius heard it, he thought for sure it had to be a wizard's name. But Sirius never heard his parents mention the Lupins, and judging by the state of his dress, Sirius doubted they ran in the same circles as the Blacks. Remus didn't talk much, just watched them with those big, round eyes, looking confused by much of the conversation. Sirius wondered if he had guessed wrong on the name. Could a Muggle have named their son Remus? James looked as though he was waiting for this question his entire life. He launched into an explanation about the Hogwarts houses, which made Peter groan. Sirius sighed as well, but secretly he was quite interested. He had never heard anyone other than his family discuss the houses. It was a bit of a shock to get a new perspective. So Gryffindor, James was saying, it's all about loyalty, bravery and honour. They've all got bollocks for brains. Sirius could hear echoes of his father's voice after having an extra glass of wine at the Lestrange's dinner party. Hufflepuff is all about acceptance. They're really kind, I suppose, and they've got a lot of hidden talent, I think. James clearly wasn't as enthusiastic about the other houses, but he was trying to find something nice to say. Full of mudbloods, Warpugger's voice hissed inside of Sirius's head. Ravenclaws are really clever. Their house is all about brains. And creativity, I suppose. They've got good brains, some of them, but their heads are always stuck in the clouds. And Slytherin. Well, they're supposed to be cunning, I suppose. I don't really understand how that's different from being smart. But they're ambitious too. Honestly, a lot of dark wizards come from Slytherin. Almost all of them, actually. Slytherin is a house of nobility. Anyone who's going anywhere is in Slytherin. I'd steer clear if I were you, mate. James said this last bit with a friendly nod to Remus, a heads up between mates. Reckon I'll be in Slytherin, Sirius said, frowning. James looked at him, bemused. Oh, come on, surely not. The words were said as if in reassurance. Sirius wondered if James had had this conversation with Peter, or one like it. Sirius raised an eyebrow. My whole family's in Slytherin. Big tradition. There hasn't been a black in another house for about 500 years. Now James could see that he'd put his foot in his mouth. He flushed, and said awkwardly, Oh, sorry mate, didn't realise. Well, cheers. I'm sure there's plenty of cool Slytherins. My family's just a bit partial to Gryffindor, that's all. He smiled apologetically, a peace offering, and Sirius smiled back. Nah, don't worry about it. My family's the worst. He made a valiant effort to laugh, and James chuckled awkwardly with him. I'm sure I'll get stuck in Hufflepuff, Peter moaned, flopping back onto the seat, and for once Sirius was grateful for his complaining. Now come on, Pete, don't be like that. Hufflepuff's cool too. All the houses are great. It sounded as if these two friends had had this conversation, or iterations of it many times. Sirius leaned back and glanced at Remus. This whole explanation had been for his benefit, after all. But Lupin was staring out the window, watching trees flash by, looking as if he wasn't paying any attention to them at all. Sirius thought his heart might beat its way out of his chest. He didn't even glance down as their boat sliced through the dark water of the lake, though normally he would have been entranced. The sweeping stairways, the stone columns, even the starry ceiling. All of it hardly registered. The castle was magnificent, but Sirius Black was used to magnificence. He hadn't expected anything less. So as they entered the great hall full of chattering students, more children in one room than Sirius had ever seen, all different sorts, they were all turning to look. His focus was entirely on the shabby hat propped up on the wooden stool. The sorting hat. Sirius tried to swallow, but it felt like there was a brick in his throat. At the Slytherin table, he could feel Narcissa and Bellatrix staring at him. When he looked over, they smirked. This was it then, Sirius thought, as Professor McGonagall began calling names. Slytherin. He'd always known it was coming. All thought of Hogwarts was inexplicably bound up with Slytherin, where he would spend the next 7 years. His whole family went on about it for ages. Any time school was brought up, all the wonderful memories, the crucial connections, the like-minded people, the pure blood. Slytherin had the lowest Muggle-born acceptance rate of any house in Hogwarts. Sirius tried to find the excitement he'd felt just a few hours earlier, buzzing in his chest, but the train ride had done something funny to his head. He liked James. He liked the way James talked about Gryffindor most of all. He liked not having to think about his bloody family even just for a short while. Sirius knew he should be thrilled at the prospect of walking over to take a seat next to his cousins, but looking at them, all he felt was a cold wash of dread. Sirius Black! He couldn't swallow, walking up to the little stool. Sirius thought he might be sick. Pull it together, he chastised himself. This is all you've ever wanted. You're at Hogwarts. It will be just like the wand ceremony, he told himself. His parents would be proud. Wouldn't they? Wouldn't they? It was the last thought Sirius had before the hat settled onto his head. Ah, another black, said the hat. Its voice was gruff. Sirius felt like it was scratching the inside of his head. Suppose this one should be easy, eh? Right, the hat was right. It should be easy. Any second now. It would call out the name. What's this? And his parents would be proud. They definitely would. Wasn't that what he wanted? What do you want, eh? Sirius cringed, realizing that the hat could read his thoughts. But he couldn't stop himself from thinking. It was a good enough reason to go into Slytherin, wasn't it? To make his family proud? He had Reg to think about. He'd have to look out for Reg. Very interesting, young Sirius. Very interesting indeed. If this stupid hat would just shut up and get on with it, then everything would be fine. He just needed to say, Gryffindor! Sirius's heart leapt out of his throat. It was a mistake. It had to be a mistake. People were starting to clap now, and McGonagall had already taken the hat. She was calling the next name. And Chrissy and Bella. Oh no, they were looking at him. His mother would know before the night was out, wouldn't she? How had he messed it up so badly? All he needed to do was wear the stupid hat. Sirius stood stiffly, walking over to the Gryffindor tables. He could feel the Slytherins staring at him as he sat down. Traitor. He was the first of the new students to sit down at the Gryffindor table. He got a few pats on the back and good-natured smiles, along with a few wary looks, presumably from the students who were familiar with the family name. At the front, the sorting continued, but Sirius found himself unable to pay attention. Failure. A complete and utter failure. That's what he was. A disappointment to the family. He could imagine exactly what his mother would say if she was here with him. Sirius felt very small and very alone, even though he was surrounded by cheering Gryffindors. He perked up a bit when Remus Lupin got sorted into Gryffindor. Though they'd barely said 2 words to each other on the train, he'd smiled at Sirius in the station. Surely that meant he wanted to be friends, right? But Sirius sat down and stared doggedly at his plate, as though determined not to make conversation. Sirius frowned. He was surprised when Peter got sorted into Gryffindor, Privately, he had agreed with the small boy in the train when he'd said he was going into Hufflepuff. It wasn't until James got sorted, the hat was barely on his head for 2 seconds before it called out Gryffindor, that Sirius began to feel a tiny bit better. At least he'd have one friend. Remus still hadn't said a word, and Peter seemed too anxious to speak to him. "How great is that?" James said, grinning broadly as he sat down. "We all made it." He made it sound like a grand achievement. Sirius groaned, his head in his arms on the table. "Speak for yourself," he replied, slightly muffled. "My father's going to kill me." It was so much easier saying father than mother. Sirius didn't want to think about what his mother would do. "I can't believe it," Peter kept saying, eyes wide. He shuffled a bit closer to James, darting glances around the room as if he thought someone might come over and drag him away from the table. Sirius thought he was acting ridiculous, so he was a bit surprised when McGonagall actually did walk over, but she placed a hand on Remus's shoulder, not Peter's. "Mr. Lupin," she murmured, "if you'd please come to my office after dinner. It's right next to the Gryffindor common room. One of the prefects can show you." Remus nodded mutely as she left. "What was that about?" James asked. "McGonagall wants to see you already?" Remus looked at them, shoulders hunching forward slightly as if he was trying to protect himself from their attention. He kept his face blank, but Sirius peered at his eyes, which were wary, perhaps a bit frightened, like a stray dog backed into a corner. They waited for an answer, but he only shrugged. "He's got a secret," Sirius thought, and for a moment he forgot to be miserable. They were about to enter when James grabbed at Sirius's arm. "Oi, hang back a minute, lads. Let's see if Remus wants us to wait for him." Sirius blinked, then shrugged. Remus hadn't said a word to them since they got off the train, but he supposed it couldn't hurt. Peter looked a bit put out, but they both trailed James as he jogged down the corridor towards McGonagall's office. When they arrived outside the door, Remus was nowhere to be found. "Well, are we waiting?" "Nah, you go on ahead," James replied, smiling. Peter glanced at Sirius. "Aren't you coming with us?" "I'll just stick around for a bit." He missed the password from Frank. Peter wrung his hands nervously, glancing between James and Sirius as if unsure whether he should offer to stay as well. "Oh, come on then," Sirius sighed, rolling his eyes. He was too tired to stand out in the hallway until Remus's secret meeting was over. It wasn't as if anyone knew how long it would take. After a moment of hesitation, Peter followed him back to their room. The Gryffindor common room was lovely, all decked out in red and gold, with plush armchairs and a thick carpet. Their room wasn't half bad either, although it would be Sirius's first time sharing a bedroom, and it was a bit cramped for his liking with the 4 massive beds. He flopped onto his mattress as Peter began digging through his trunk. Gryffindor! Of all the rotten luck, he'd be stuck in bloody Gryffindor. He supposed it was better than Hufflepuff. His mother would have lost her mind if he ended up there. He'd heard her rants about the number of Muggle-borns they accepted. Still, Sirius felt hollowed out. With the wands and everything, he thought maybe... Well, he wondered if he was meant to be a black. If all his worries about not fitting in, or fitting in wrong, had been... Sirius sighed, rolling over onto his back. It didn't matter now. Here was proof of what he had known secretly to be true. He didn't belong. He was a disappointment. And if his parents didn't know by now, they would tomorrow. He had had no doubt that Bellatrix would be racing to the owl roost to spread the news. She had always seemed to have a kick out of whenever Sirius slipped up, and this, of course, had been much more than a simple mistake. This was permanent. As the door to their room swung open and James came in, Remus followed behind him, eyes bugging slightly as he looked over the room. Sirius sat up, watching them, curious. Remus was staring around the room like he couldn't believe his eyes. As he looked at the velvet-draped beds and the wooden trunks, something hardened in his face, as if he'd come to some private decision. Sirius wondered what that was about. "I can't find my wand," he wailed. "Mum made me pack it so I wouldn't lose it on the train, but it's not here." "Pete!" James grinned. "Your mum asked me to look after it, remember?" James and Peter, Sirius had learnt at dinner, had grown up as neighbours, and knew each other quite well. That explained why James was so kind to Peter. Sirius had wondered what the two could possibly have in common. When James noticed Sirius sulking, he smiled. "Cheer up, mate," James said, sitting next to him on the bed. "You didn't want to be in Slytherin anyway, did you?" He said it with such confidence, as though it were obvious. Still, the question echoed in Sirius's head. Did you? Did you? What did you want? 500 years. His voice was stony as he replied. Every black at Hogwarts had been sorted into Slytherin for 500 years. "Well, it's about time someone tried to be different, eh?" James slapped him on the back jovially. Sirius felt a sudden surge of emotion. He wasn't sure what it was about James Potter, the smile, the happy confidence, but somehow, hearing him talk like things would be all right made Sirius feel as if, maybe, they would be all right. After all, it was true, wasn't it? Sirius hadn't wanted to be in Slytherin. Not really. And he loved the colour red. "If I'm going to be a family disappointment," Sirius thought, moving his trunk, "I'll be the best bloody disappointment they've ever had." He started to unpack, pulling out books Andromeda had kept for him. There were quite a few of them. He had to stack ones that didn't fit on the shelf beside his bed. "You know," James said, as Sirius continued stacking his books, "there is a library here." Sirius smirked. "I know, but these are mostly Muggle books. Uncle Alfred left them to me, and Mum would set them on fire if I left them at home." Peter's eyes widened at that, and he glanced curiously at the books, which made Sirius feel extremely cool. Once he had finished with the books, he pulled out his record player, followed by a box of records in shining cellophane sleeves. Andromeda was truly, truly the best. Sirius barely set them down before Remus came over, eyes wide with wonder. "Is that Abbey Road?" he asked, peering down into the box of vinyl. That wary look was gone momentarily from his eyes. "Yeah," Sirius grinned, handing it to him. Remus wiped his hands carefully on his robes before taking it, as though the record was something fragile and precious. "You must be Muggle-born," Sirius said. "Never met a wizard who knows the Beatles. Except for my cousin Andromeda. She bought them for me." He'd been wanting to ask about it, but he wasn't sure how to bring it up. He didn't want the others to think he was like the rest of his family, obsessed with blood purity. But Sirius really was curious. Remus seemed so surprised by everything at Hogwarts. Remus nodded, though it seemed like he was only half listening. "Loved the Beatles. One of the boys in my room at home's got at least 10 singles, but he'd never let me touch them." "Boys at home?" Sirius arched an eyebrow. "Is that something Muggle said? You mean your brother?" "No." Remus's eyes shuddered. He shook his head. He handed the record back to Sirius and retreated, shoulders hunching again. "I live in a children's home." "Like an orphanage?" Peter asked, wide-eyed. Remus's eyes went flat and dark, brow tugging down. "No," he spat. Sirius waited for him to say something else, but he didn't, only turned and kept unpacking. Sirius desperately wanted to ask more questions, but he could see that Remus had gone silent on them again. What was a children's home, if it wasn't an orphanage? Were there no adults? Was that how Sirius got his black eye? Fighting the other kids? He certainly seemed like the type to throw a punch, the way he glared at when Peter asked his question. Eventually, Sirius asked James about his Quidditch poster just to break the awkward silence. Their conversation very quickly turned into a very heated argument, and they were still debating the latest lineup for the Chudley Cannons when Remus climbed into his bed and pulled the curtains shut. There was a pause before Peter whispered loudly, "You think he'd try harder to make friends, especially if he's Muggle-born?" Sirius stiffened. He thought one of the only good things about failing to be placed in Slytherin was that he'd be away from all that nonsense. And besides, Remus seemed much cooler than Pete. He obviously had better taste in music. "Are you sure the House wasn't supposed to put you in Slytherin?" Sirius drawled. Peter promptly shut up.